I was sitting in the kitchen, gazing at the cracked walls of our country house, which had long been crying out for a fresh coat of paint. Everything around seemed dull and outdated, as if our home too had grown weary of life. Dan, my husband, noticed all these flaws too. But so far, we had always postponed the renovation. "Katie, we need to do something about this house," he declared one evening, looking around. "The walls are peeling, the parquet is creaking, and the garden is overgrown with weeds. It's time to renovate." I nodded, knowing he was right. Our house, which once felt so cozy, now looked shabby and in need of a transformation. We both knew that renovations were expensive, and if we wanted to do everything properly, we had to be prepared for significant expenses. "Maybe we should hire professional workers?" I suggested, though I knew our budget could barely support such an expense. Dan shook his head. "No, Kate, we don't have that kind of money. We can't afford such a luxury, but we can try to do everything ourselves." I thought for a moment. It wouldn't be easy, but the idea of spending more time with Dan, working side by side, sparked a bit of excitement in me. Perhaps the renovation would give us a chance to feel like a team again and breathe new life into our marriage. "I think you're right," I replied with a smile. "It could be a good opportunity for us." The next day, Dan, seemingly invigorated by a new surge of energy, suddenly remembered his nephew Liam. Liam, a 25-year-old student, had recently lost his job and was looking for a way to earn some money. It occurred to Dan that this might be a perfect opportunity for both of us, for Liam to make some money and for us to get some help with the renovation. "I think I've found a way to make the renovation cheaper," Dan said, approaching me with a cup of coffee in hand. "Why don't we ask Liam to help? He's out of work now anyway, so he could earn some cash and help us out." I thought about it. Liam was a good guy. We always got along well, but I still felt a bit hesitant about having a young man in our home for several weeks, or possibly longer. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I asked. "He has his own life, his own plans?" Dan smiled as if he had anticipated my doubts. "I already spoke to him. He'd be happy to help, and he could use the money. It's better than sitting around doing nothing." Hearing that Liam had already agreed made me feel a bit more at ease. After all, it would certainly speed up the renovation, and having a young, energetic person around might add some variety to our routine life. "All right," I nodded. "If you think it's a good idea, I'm on board. Let him come." Without wasting any time, Dan dialed Liam's number. I could hear Liam's lively voice on the phone. He seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity. A few minutes later, the call ended, and Dan, with a wide grin, informed me that Liam would arrive the next day. "Well," I said, feeling a slight sense of excitement, "let's see how this goes." Liam arrived the next day, just as he had promised. As soon as he stepped out of the car, I couldn't help but notice how tall and athletic he was. His broad smile and confident movements immediately drew everyone's attention. He seemed friendly and full of energy, and I felt a slight affection for this young man who had so quickly fit into our home environment. "Hi, Aunt Kate," he greeted me as he approached, extending his hand for a handshake. His voice was cheerful and optimistic. "Thanks for having me. I'm happy to help." "Hi, Liam," I replied, smiling back. "We're glad you're here too. This should be fun." After a quick tour of the house and a discussion of the work plan, we decided to start by painting the walls in the living room. It was hot, and I chose to wear short shorts and a tank top to stay comfortable. Liam didn't seem to mind, and we got down to work. The first few hours went by quite smoothly. Liam mixed the paint while I applied the first coat. We chatted about little things, and his humor and ease in conversation helped lighten the atmosphere. When it came time to paint the upper sections of the wall, I climbed the ladder to reach the most inaccessible spots. Liam stood below to support me, holding me by the hips. I felt his hands tighten slightly, and suddenly there was a sense of awkwardness. I froze, realizing how close he was to me. A silence hung between us, and I felt an unexpected excitement rising in my chest. A slight blush appeared on my cheeks, and I tried to focus on the task, but my thoughts kept drifting back to what I had just felt. "Are you okay up there?" Liam asked, noticing my hesitation. Yes, I'm fine," I replied quickly, trying to hide my embarrassment. "Just unexpected." I tried to concentrate on painting, but the feeling of his hands on my hips lingered. This moment made me think about what was happening in my life and why this young man suddenly started stirring such feelings in me. By midday, we had made good progress, and we decided to take a lunch break. It was too hot to stay inside, so I suggested we sit on the terrace where a light breeze was blowing. I prepared a light salad and cold lemonade, and Liam and I sat at a small wooden table surrounded by the lush flowers and greenery of the garden. "You haven't been here in a while," I said, trying to start a conversation. "What's new in your life, Liam?" He smiled and shrugged slightly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. There was something in his eyes that I couldn't immediately decipher. "Oh, not much," he replied. "I finished another semester, tried to find a job, but you know how tough it is these days. And, well, I haven't had any serious relationships in a long time. I've been feeling a bit lonely lately." His words made me pause. I noticed how he looked at his glass of lemonade with a hint of sadness, seemingly avoiding my gaze. His confession stirred an unexpected feeling of closeness in me. I realized that Liam was much deeper than I had thought, and perhaps he needed something to make him feel less alone, too. "I understand what you mean," I said, looking at him with empathy. "Life can feel complicated and confusing sometimes, especially when you're not sure what you want." Liam looked at me and smiled, his face softening. "Aunt Kate, you look amazingly young for your age. You've always been like that. And how do you manage to keep so much energy?" I felt something flutter in my heart. His compliment was unexpected but pleasant. I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, Liam," I replied, blushing slightly. "Maybe it's just that I try to stay active and positive, though, to be honest, it's not always easy." His eyes lit up with interest, and I felt a strange sensation growing inside me. For the first time in a long while, I felt that I liked this young man's attention. I couldn't quite figure out what it was that attracted me to him, but something in his gaze and his compliments ignited a spark within me that I hadn't felt for a long time. "I think you do a great job of it," Liam added with a smile. "You really are a remarkable woman." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled back, feeling an invisible but palpable tension growing between us. The next day, Liam and I decided to work in the garden. The sun was shining brightly and the morning air was fresh, filling me with energy. Liam brought out the old lawnmower, and I offered to help him since I knew it would take quite some time. My arms were already a bit sore from the previous days of renovation, but being outside felt nice, and it lifted my spirits. We started by me holding the cord away from the lawnmower while Liam maneuvered around the flower beds and bushes. Everything was going smoothly until, quite suddenly, all the sprinklers turned on. Streams of water came crashing down on us like a rainstorm out of nowhere. I found myself directly under one of the powerful jets. In an instant, my white t-shirt was soaked through, clinging to my body. The water was cold and I shivered from the shock. I quickly wiped the water from my face and turned to Liam, who seemed to have frozen in place. Liam stood there, unable to look away. His eyes were fixed on my body, now clearly visible through the wet fabric of my shirt. I felt a wave of blush spread across my cheeks, simultaneously feeling a mix of excitement and embarrassment. The thought crossed my mind about how ridiculous this must look. But at the same time, there was something thrilling in the way he was looking at me. A tension hung between us. I couldn't look away from his eyes, which held something more than mere curiosity. For a moment, everything else around us ceased to exist. I felt a spark igniting inside me, one I hadn't felt in a long time. "Sorry, Liam finally mumbled, averting his gaze. He was clearly embarrassed but couldn't hide his interest. "It's okay," I replied, trying to mask my own discomfort. "It's just the water. Caught us by surprise." I tried to act as if it didn't matter, but I could feel my heart beating a bit faster. This seemingly random and awkward situation had somehow intensified my interest in this young man even more. He glanced at me again, and in his eyes I saw something that made me pause and think. By evening, Dan returned home, tired after a long day at work. I was already preparing dinner when I heard the front door slam shut. Liam was nearby, helping me set the table. When Dan walked into the kitchen, his face lit up with a smile. "Hey, honey. Hey, Liam. How's it going?" he asked with genuine interest. "Everything's great, Dan," I replied, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. "We got a lot done today." Liam nodded in agreement, smiling. "Yeah, we did. "There's a lot of work, but we're managing," he added. We all sat down at the table and I served dinner, a simple meal but made with care. We started discussing the work and I told Dan about how the sprinklers had suddenly turned on, avoiding any mention of how the water had soaked me through. Dan laughed, unaware of the hidden glances that Liam and I exchanged when he wasn't looking. I tried not to look at Liam, but I could feel his presence even without direct eye contact. Every time his eyes touched me, I felt a wave of excitement rise in my chest. Dan seemed oblivious. He was engrossed in discussing plans for the coming days, while I tried my hardest to focus on the conversation. But deep down, I felt something entirely different. I was increasingly drawn to Liam. It wasn't just curiosity or affection. It was something forbidden, like I was slowly approaching the edge of a cliff, feeling the air becoming more rarefied and heated. I tried to understand what it was that attracted me so much to Liam. Perhaps it was his youth and energy, which contrasted so starkly with the fatigue and routine that had become part of my life with Dan. Or maybe it was the attention he gave me, the interest he showed. Something I had been missing for a long time. I caught myself more and more often seeking his gaze, looking for confirmation that this wasn't just in my imagination. Maybe it was all just a trick of my mind. But either way, I felt a growing desire that was becoming increasingly uncontrollable. As dinner came to an end, I sensed that the tension between Liam and me was growing stronger, and at the same time I realized I needed to be careful. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop anymore. This feeling had taken hold of me, something I couldn't explain, and it was slowly but surely changing my life. The next day brought another hot weather, perfect for preparing the pool. This summer had been particularly scorching, and the idea of a refreshing dip in crystal-clear water seemed very appealing. The pool behind the house hadn't been used in a while, and leaves and dirt had accumulated at the bottom. So Liam and I decided to get it cleaned. I put on my swimsuit, a dark blue one with an open back that I usually wore when I planned to sunbathe. When I stepped onto the terrace, Liam noticeably stopped and looked at me with unabashed admiration. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice sincere and slightly tense. I felt the corners of my mouth lift in a smile and a slight surge of confidence. Perhaps I had even expected such a comment, but his straightforwardness caught me a bit off guard. "Thank you, Liam," I replied, feeling my cheeks flush slightly under his gaze. "I hope this helps us endure the heat better." We started working, cleaning the pool of dirt and leaves. Liam seemed unable to resist glancing at me from time to time, and I couldn't help but notice his admiration. This attention from a younger man was something new for me, and I felt a mix of embarrassment and pleasant excitement. After a few hours of work under the scorching sun, I felt my skin beginning to burn slightly, and sweat trickled down my body. It was the perfect opportunity to take a step forward and test my suspicions. "Phew, it's so hot out here," I exclaimed, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I think we should cool off. Why don't we take turns in the shower before continuing?" Liam hesitated for a moment but then nodded, clearly intrigued by the suggestion. "Yeah, sure, that's a great idea," he agreed, not hiding his curiosity. I headed to the shower first, jokingly tossing over my shoulder, "Don't worry, I don't bite. Or have you really never seen a girl in the shower before?" I felt adrenaline flooding my veins. My tone was playful, but I knew this game was more than that. It was a test of boundaries, a step away from the ordinary. Thoughts swirled in my head. Would he dare to take the next step, or would he back away? I waited for him to join me in the shower, feeling the anticipation that gripped me. I stood under the streams of water, feeling the cool drops cascade down my skin, washing away the heat of the day and the remnants of doubt. I could hear a rustle outside the door, knowing that Liam was there, contemplating whether to join me. The anticipation grew sharper with every passing moment. I tried to maintain an outward calm, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. After what felt like an eternity, the door slightly creaked open, and I saw Liam standing hesitantly at the threshold. His eyes held uncertainty, but also a glint of resolve. He took a step forward, closing the door behind him, and his gaze met mine. The air was thick with tension and something irresistibly compelling. "Are you sure you want this?" I asked softly, feeling my heart racing. Liam paused for a moment, then took another step closer. "Yes," he replied, his voice barely audible over the noise of the water. There was an initial awkwardness between us, but it quickly gave way to something stronger, something undeniable. His eyes, filled with desire, roamed over my body, and I felt a hot wave of excitement travel up my spine. We stood close, so close that I could feel his breath on my skin. And in that moment, our eyes locked, and everything else vanished. Suddenly, I stopped thinking, stopped questioning myself. The only thing that mattered was the feel of his touch, his warmth. I could no longer hold back, and our lips met in a kiss, full of passion and fire. It was a forbidden moment, but I couldn't fight what I felt any longer. Liam responded to my kiss, and his arms wrapped around my body, pulling me closer. The water continued to crash around us, creating an invisible curtain that shielded us from the world. We couldn't stop anymore. Our bodies melded into one, and each minute became more intense, more filled with a feeling that carried us further beyond the bounds of what was right. We surrendered to this moment, knowing it was wrong but powerless to stop. The forbidden closeness overwhelmed us, and every kiss, every touch felt like the first time. The water roared around us too loudly for us to hear anything else. We lost ourselves in this moment, forgetting everything else, consumed by the passion that filled every corner of our being. At that moment, when time seemed to slow down, Liam and I completely lost our sense of reality. The water roared around us, masking everything happening outside that small, steamy room. We forgot everything. The house, our responsibilities, the possibility that someone could return at any moment. All that mattered was what was happening between us. But reality, as often happens, came crashing down unexpectedly. Dan returned home much earlier than I had expected. I faintly heard the front door close, but the noise of the water drowned out all sounds, and I didn't realize at that moment that it could be Dan. He entered the house, taking off his jacket and tossing it on the couch in the living room. His face showed signs of fatigue, and he was clearly glad to be home earlier to spend time with his family. "Kate? Liam?" he called out, looking into the rooms. Receiving no answer, Dan noticed that the house seemed empty and quiet. He walked through the hallways, checking the bedrooms, the kitchen, but found no one. Then his attention was drawn to the sound of water coming from the bathroom. At first, he paid no mind, assuming someone was simply taking a shower. But when he realized he didn't hear any voices or movement, his suspicions grew. Dan headed toward the bathroom, his steps becoming more determined, and troubling thoughts flashed in his mind. He approached the door and stopped, listening. The water continued to flow, but there was no other sound. He knocked on the door, but there was no response. Another knock, and still silence. Unable to bear it, he cautiously turned the handle and slightly opened the door. His eyes widened in surprise and shock. What he saw made his heart skip a few beats. In front of him was a scene he could never have imagined. Kate and Liam embracing under the streams of water, lost in a moment of passion, oblivious to the world around them. They didn't hear him. The sound of the water drowned out everything else. But Dan felt a surge of anger rising in his chest. He knew he had to do something, say something. But for a moment, he just stood there stunned by what he saw. "What is going on here?" he finally shouted, his voice trembling with rage and pain. Kate and Liam jolted, suddenly realizing Dan's presence. Shock and panic were reflected on their faces as they locked eyes with Dan, understanding that he had seen everything. Dan's voice broke through the silence like a bolt of lightning. His shout echoed over the sound of the water, striking me right in the heart. In an instant, I realized that Liam and I were caught in the most compromising and revealing situation possible. I felt completely exposed, despite the water streaming down my body. Panic gripped me, and my hands trembled as I reached for the nearest towel. "What is going on here?" Dan shouted again, his voice filled with rage and pain. "Explain yourselves right now!" Liam, stunned and bewildered, backed away and tried to cover himself with the first towel he could grab. I instinctively did the same, feeling my face flush with shame and fear. My heart pounded so loudly that it seemed it could be heard even over the noise of the water. "Dan, it's not what you think," I began. But my words came out weak and unsure, and I knew they would hardly calm him. "Not what I think?" Dan repeated, his face reddening with anger. "Are you trying to tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding? What were you doing in the shower together, Kate?" His eyes flashed with anger, and there was deep hurt in them. I felt tears welling up, but I held them back. Liam, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to step in. "Uncle Dan, I don't know how to explain this," he stammered. "It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." These words only fueled Dan's anger further. His face turned crimson and his voice rose to a new level of fury. "You didn't mean to hurt anyone? You, a young fool, come into my house and start making moves on my wife?" He turned to me, his eyes filled with pain and betrayal. "And you, Kate? How could you? After everything we've been through? You betrayed me." I didn't know what to say. My heart was racing wildly, and I felt fear and guilt seeping into every cell of my body. Liam stood next to me, his face pale, and I realized we had gone too far. "Get out of my house," Dan growled, his voice trembling with fury. "Right now, and never come back." Liam nodded silently, understanding there was no point in resisting. He quickly gathered his things and, after giving me one last look, headed for the door. I stood there, paralyzed, feeling the world crumble around me. Dan, without another word, left the bathroom, leaving me alone in a state of utter despair. Dan left the bathroom, leaving me in a state of shock and horror. But his silence didn't last long. Soon he appeared at the door again, his face burning with rage. I realized he wasn't going to let this go so easily. His gaze was fixed on me, and I could see his anger only growing. "Kate," he began, his voice trembling with suppressed fury. "I can't believe you could do something like this. Liam, he's young, he was probably just misled by you. But you are a grown woman, you are my wife." I stood in the bathroom, feeling my legs start to give way beneath me. His words pierced me like daggers. I knew he was hurting, and I knew there were no excuses for what I had done. "Dan, please," I began, but he cut me off before I could finish. "I don't want to hear anything, Kate. You betrayed me and destroyed everything we had, and I'm not going to let this go. You need to leave. Right now," he said, his voice cold and resolute. "You must leave this house immediately." I felt his words like hammers breaking everything around me. But Dan didn't stop there. "If you even think for a second about claiming any of the property or trying to see Liam, I will take every legal measure possible. I will not give you anything, Kate. You've lost everything," he continued, his voice even firmer. Tears began to stream down my cheeks. I knew he meant every word, and I had no other choice. I had to leave. I silently left the bathroom and headed to the bedroom, where I started packing my things. I threw them into a bag without sorting, all in a meaningless, panicked frenzy. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it was about to burst. I couldn't believe that my life had changed so drastically in just a few minutes. Dan watched me from the doorway, his face unreadable. He didn't say a word, but his gaze spoke louder than any words. It was the look of someone who felt betrayed and crushed. When my bag was full, I picked it up and headed for the door. My legs felt weak, but I held myself together, trying not to show any signs of weakness. "Go, Kate, and don't come back," Dan said quietly, his voice trembling but still resolute. I left the house feeling the tears streaming down my cheeks. A mixture of shame and despair overwhelmed me. I knew that nothing could be undone and my life had changed forever. I found myself in a new world filled with uncertainty and anxiety. The home that had once been my fortress, my sanctuary, was now closed to me forever. I was left alone, without a home, without money, without hope. Dan had followed through on his threats, blocking my access to bank accounts and credit cards. In an instant, I lost everything. I moved into a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. The room was cramped and unwelcoming, furnished with pieces that seemed to belong to a bygone era. Every corner reminded me of how far I was from my former life. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to comprehend how everything had unraveled so quickly. It felt like one mistake had destroyed everything I had built over the years. Financial difficulties began to appear immediately. Finding a job proved to be harder than I had imagined. I sent out resumes, but few replied. The rare interviews I was invited to ended in polite refusals. It was as if everyone knew what I had done, and no one wanted anything to do with me, as if my past had become a stain that couldn't be washed away. The acquaintances I once had now avoided me. I felt judgment and disdain in their glances. They no longer called, texted, or invited me to meet. I was left alone, and this loneliness grew more intense with each passing day. No one wanted to deal with a woman who had destroyed her own life in a single moment of weakness. Every day I woke up with a heaviness in my chest. The thoughts of what had happened haunted me. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself that I needed to move on, but the guilt and shame followed me everywhere. I replayed that moment over and over in my mind, trying to understand what had driven me to do what I did. But there were no answers. There was only despair and hopelessness. I couldn't forgive myself. I had ruined my life, destroyed everything that mattered to me. One moment of weakness had turned everything upside down, and now I didn't know how to piece myself back together and start anew. I felt my confidence slipping away day by day, as fear of the future took hold, and I saw no way out. The life I had known seemed distant and unreal, like a dream from which I had suddenly awakened, and reality was harsh and unforgiving. I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't regain Dan's trust, couldn't reclaim my former life. All that was left to me were regrets and pain. A few weeks later, when I had almost come to terms with the new reality of my life, fate brought me face to face with Liam again. It happened in a small cafe on the corner of the street, where I had gone to have a cup of coffee and try to distract myself from my heavy thoughts. The place was cozy, with soft lighting and the smell of freshly baked pastries, and for a moment, I felt a sense of calm. I was sitting at a small table by the window, watching the passers-by, when I heard a familiar voice. Looking up, I saw Liam standing at the entrance. He noticed me too and froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. We were both caught off guard, and I felt my heart start to race. An awkward silence hung in the air, but then he hesitantly approached my table. "Hi, Kate," he said quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. "Mind if I sit down?" I nodded, trying to hide my nerves. "Hi, Liam. Of course, have a seat." We sat across from each other, and for the first few minutes there was an uncomfortable silence between us. I didn't know where to start. Words wouldn't come, and I tried to catch his gaze to understand what he was feeling. Finally, he spoke. "I feel awful about everything that happened," he began, avoiding my eyes. "I don't know how it got this far, but I never wanted it to end like this." I nodded, feeling a wave of pain rise within me again. "I feel the same, Liam. I don't know why it all happened. Maybe I was just looking for something to fill the emptiness in my life." He looked at me, and there was genuine sadness in his eyes. "I feel guilty, Kate. I feel like I let you and Uncle Dan down. I never wanted this to become such a mess." I realized that he was suffering too, that he, like me, was trapped by his own mistakes and wrong decisions. And at that moment, I understood that our relationship was a mistake from the very beginning, driven by my boredom, my inner conflicts, and a desire to find something new and exciting. "I think we need to leave it all behind." I finally found the right words. It was wrong, and we both know it. Maybe it was an escape from reality, but it didn't bring any good to you or me. Liam nodded in agreement. "Yes, you're right. We shouldn't see each other anymore. I think it's better for everyone." We both felt a sense of relief at these words, as if a weight had finally been lifted from our shoulders. This was our last meeting, and I knew it was necessary to close this chapter of my life. When Liam left, I stayed at the table alone, feeling a mixture of loss and disappointment. I knew I needed to move on, but I didn't know how to deal with the emptiness left behind by everything that had happened. I felt lost and broken, but I slowly began to realize that I had to accept my mistakes and learn from them. Perhaps this was the first step toward finding myself and building a new life, free of regrets and the past that could never be reclaimed. Several months had passed since I last saw Liam. Life gradually moved on, and I was trying to find a new sense of purpose. I often visited the library, seeking to distract myself from my thoughts, looking for answers in books about self-development and overcoming life's difficulties. One day I went to a small library in the city center. There, I met James, the owner of a local bookstore. He was about 50, with a warm smile and an insightful gaze. He noticed me carefully examining the psychology and philosophy section and approached to start a conversation. "It looks like you're looking for something specific," he said, noticing my hesitation in front of the shelf. "Yes," I replied with a smile. "I'm looking for books that can help me understand myself and my mistakes." "Perhaps I can recommend something?" James offered with a friendly smile. "Literature has always been my passion, especially books that help people understand themselves and the world around them." That's how our conversation began. We talked about books we had read, shared thoughts about life, and the search for one's path. James turned out to be an incredibly thoughtful and attentive person. He didn't ask unnecessary questions about my past. He just listened, offering his views and suggestions. We began to see each other more often. Sometimes we met at the library, other times at his bookstore, where over a cup of coffee, we discussed literature, life, and everything that concerned us both. James turned out to be not only an attentive interlocutor, but also someone who didn't judge me for my mistakes. Instead, he saw me as a strong woman who had gone through difficulties and continued to fight. Over time, I realized that I was beginning to feel something more for him than just gratitude. I felt a deep connection forming between us. James never rushed things, and this allowed me to be honest with myself and with him. In him, I found support and understanding, and I realized that I no longer wanted to repeat old mistakes. I decided to be completely honest and sincere in our relationship. I understood that I would no longer devalue my feelings or seek risky situations for a momentary thrill. James deserved better, and I was ready to offer him a relationship based on honesty and openness, with no place for lies or secrecy. Gradually, our relationship grew stronger. James supported me in my quest for self-development, encouraged my interests, and helped me see qualities in myself that I hadn't noticed in a long time. I began to learn to appreciate what we had, and understood that real relationships require time, patience, and honesty. I gained a new understanding of love and trust. James and I built our relationship on mutual respect and understanding, and I realized that I had found in him not just a partner but a friend. Together we faced difficulties, learned to trust each other, and appreciated every moment we spent together. This was the beginning of a new life. I realized I had found the strength to move on and had gained a new understanding of what true love means. I was ready not to repeat the mistakes of the past and to build a happy relationship with James, full of trust and mutual respect.